Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. We have Jannik versus Carlos Alcaraz for the Cincinnati Open 2025 final. It is the rivalry that keeps on giving, a rematch of their Wimbledon and Roland Garros finals where they split both titles. And now we've got a hard court matchup. So they would have played on all three surfaces in the space of 3 or 4 months. We are being spoiled, we really are. Cannot wait to get into this one, but before we do, remember to hit that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform. Shout out to our members as well. As always, we are going to break this down in a few different ways. We're going to talk about the head-to-head and the matches they've played so far. We will then talk about their route to the final. Then we will break down some tennis insights that have been provided by Tennis Insights and Tennis Viz. Thank you and shout out to those guys as well. And we'll be talking about tournament averages, so shot quality and what that might mean for this matchup, where we will then break down strategically how it might play out. And ultimately, I'll give you guys my prediction. So the head-to-head is 8-5 in favor of Carlos Alcaraz, and he had actually been on a bit of a tear when it came to this rivalry. He'd won 5 matches in a row, but Jannik stopped him in his tracks, of course, at Wimbledon, and now we have this hardcourt matchup. So how does the head-to-head look on outdoor hardcourt? Well, on outdoor hard, the last time they played was in Beijing in 2024, a very, very exciting and really high-level final where Carlos took it in a final set tiebreaker in the Beijing final. So he won that one. Then the time before that was at Indian Wells. He took that in 3 sets. They had played in Beijing in 2023. Jannik won in straight sets. And then in Miami, he also won as well in the same year in 3. Carlos beat him though Indian Wells a few weeks earlier from that Miami Open defeat, beat Jannik in straight sets, and then also beat him at the US Open, of course, in 2022, when he went on to win his first Grand Slam title and also his first US Open title, which is still to date his only US Open title for now. Anyway, and that was a 5-set thriller. So the head-to-head on outdoor hard is 4-2 in favor of Carlos, which might be surprising to some of you because I think it's fair to say that Jannik is seen as the outdoor hardcourt king, and I think probably indoor hardcourt king as well. So let's just say generally the hardcourt king. But Carlos has seemed to be able to get the upper hand more often than not when it's come to hardcourts, which has been very interesting. I think his variety playing a part. Let's now talk about their route. So Alcaraz came up against Zuma, won in 3 sets, then Medvedev in straight sets, Nardi as well in straights. Then came up against a very impressive and motivated Andrei Rublev, beat him in 3 sets, 7-5 in that 3rd set, so a tight one. Then against Zverev, 1-6, 4-6, 3. The first set was pretty high level. Sasha then completely tailed off physically in the 2nd set. Look, I don't want to speculate and say exactly what happened in that, but it looks like he was physically struggling more than anything, and that's, you know, a shame, obviously struggling with something there. Carlos, though, has looked impressive, especially on serve. 11 aces against Sasha. Now, I don't want to read too much into that because, yes, I know he was physically hampered a little bit, but Sasha is one of the best returners on tour. So to 11 aces against him is some going, and 81% behind that first serve. Against Rublev, also hit 11 aces, 75% behind the first serve. So some big numbers, 12 aces against Medvedev, 7 against Zuma, only the 2 against Nardi. So, look, I mean, Alcaraz has been playing some good tennis. I think these courts, from what I've seen, have been pretty quick. I think on the court pace index, it's at a 43, which is classed as medium fast. I was looking, and they are classed as being slightly quicker than last year. I will try and put up a graphic here on this side of the screen so you guys can have a look, because it's a very interesting graphic that was put together by Matt Willis Tennis, and it's really interesting to see how quick all the surfaces are playing. Interestingly, the Canadian Open this year was seen as being playing faster than Cincinnati. Take from that what you will. And yeah, but also we didn't see it all the top players, especially on the men's side, competing in that, so it's tough to really compare. For Jannik, he has looked very impressive, not dropping a single set as of yet. I think there has been some annoyance, minor annoyance on his side about his serve. He's, after the Diallo win, he booked a practice court and then started practicing there straight after the match and practicing his serve clean, not happy with how he was serving. And he has played a few tiebreakers but come out on top. Beat Galan 6-1, 6-1, then Diallo 6-2, 7-6, so straight sets then. Manarino was 6-4, 7-6. Manarino put up a really good fight in that one, I have to say. And then against Felix Auger-Aliassime, it was just an absolute shutout. Really impressive from Jannik. 6-love, 6-2. Felix has the winning head-to-head, or leading head-to-head versus Felix 2-love or 2-0 before that quarterfinal. Both matches were in 2022 though, so a lot of people were talking about that, and I didn't really take much heed of it at all because the Jannik of 2022 is completely different from the Jannik at the end of 2023 onwards. It's just a completely different animal. So then beat Atman 7-6, 6-2. Very impressive there from Jannik as well. Atman playing some inspired tennis. So how does this one play out? Well, let's bring up the shot quality averages. I'll also explain to you very briefly as well how these shot qualities, or shot quality averages, sorry, even, are calculated. So as you can see here on screen, the tournament average, so this is the Cincinnati average, is the larger numbers. Then you have in the middle the tour averages, which you can see in smaller text there. And on the left-hand side is a 52-week average comparison. So whether it's, you can see here, for example, for Jannik, he's serving at an 8.0 tournament average for Cincinnati, and that is 0.2 lower than his 52-week average comparison. Now, just bear in mind the 52-week average comparison obviously takes into account all different surfaces. So there are going to be some fluctuations, of course, throughout the year because of that, and surfaces can play a part. On serve, so let me just quickly go through this and then I'll talk about how this is calculated. So as you can see, every metric apart from Carlos's serve is actually slightly down for each player. So for Jannik, he's actually down by 0.2 on serve at an 8.0. The tour average is 7.9. And Alcaraz is matching the tour average at 7.9. But that is exactly what his 52-week average comparison is anyway. His 52-week average is 7.9. So he stayed very steady on serve. In terms of return, he's dropped by 1.3. That's quite a big drop off for Jannik. The tour average is 6.5. And for him, he's at a 6.8 during Cincinnati. Carlos is interestingly higher than Jannik at a 7.1. I would actually, generally speaking, and obviously Cincinnati, we're talking about a tournament here, a specific tournament, but generally I would actually class Sinner potentially as a better returner than Carlos. And let me know in the comment section what you think on that actually, in terms of effectiveness. So that is for Carlos, a drop of 0.5. And actually what's interesting is if we take their 52-week averages, so Carlos's average return quality is 7.6. For Jannik, it is actually an 8.1. So the 52-week averages does substantiate my thinking behind return quality. In terms of forehand, Jannik is at an 8.5, which is very impressive, but that is a 0.4 drop from his 52-week average. Carlos is at 8.0, which is a 0.6 dip for him. And then forehand tour average is 7.5, so both of them well above that tour average. Then on backhand, this is where it gets interesting. 8.2 for Jannik, that's a drop of 0.2. And then 7.1 for Carlos, that's a drop of 0.9. So that's a big drop for him on the backhand wing. Tour average is 7.1, so he's actually trending at the tour average at the moment, Carlos, which is probably doesn't make good reading at the moment. He has been slicing his backhand a lot, so I do wonder, maybe it hasn't been as effective as maybe was thought whilst watching him, because you thought, okay, he's playing with more variety, but that's not necessarily always going to give the desired result. So in terms of how this is calculated, so this is algorithmic technology that processes the ball and player tracking data to calculate shot quality. Shot quality is calculated in real time by analyzing the speed, spin, depth, and width of every shot. Each shot type requires a different combination of speed, spin, depth, and width. For example, the quality of a drop shot will be measured very differently compared to a backhand cross court. So just bear in mind that each shot is calculated on its specific merit. So when we now dive into these insights, I just want to very briefly talk about it. So the stats and, for both players back up the Cincinnati averages. So Jannik is at a 7% drop in total returns made. First serve returns made, drop of 8%. Forehand return speed down by 4 miles per hour and 2 miles per hour down as well on his backhand return. For Alcaraz, forehand, if we look at his forehand metrics, his speed's down by 2 miles per hour, shots in percentages down by 1%, so not a huge dip. Spin down though by 400 RPM, and average winners per match is down by 2.8 winners on average per match. Also worth noting though, for Alcaraz on the forehand, he does suffer from a little bit of a drop in concentration. I think as we've noticed, he can fall asleep at the wheel a little bit at times, and the Juma match is a good example. So his forehand shot quality was actually 9.7 in that first set, then 7.5 in the second and 7.4 in the third. So big disparity there. Similar against Rublev, 9.2 in the first set, but then dropped to a 7.8 in the second set and then 6.9 in the third. So yeah, very interesting. Obviously a large part of these numbers, I think the drop in numbers is going to be due to how fast these hard courts are, because it makes it a lot harder to return when it's as quick as this. What I would have thought potentially though is that their serve metrics might have been higher, but obviously they haven't maybe been serving quite as well as they could have been potentially. I mean, Alcaraz, I think at times, these metrics take into account accuracy, etc. And I do feel like sometimes he's not the most accurate on serve, and so that's maybe why as well his metric is not as high as maybe others. And for Sinner as well, I think he clearly hasn't thought that his serve has been A1 for him anyway, personally, given that he went back and then was practicing after the Diallo match. And I think he's done that at least another time as well since. So yeah, very interesting to have a read. Obviously, the only metric that Carlos is pipping Jannik on is the return. So look, I think the serve return dynamic is always key in this matchup. And I think given the pace of courts, I think both players will definitely go for their first serve. They'll know that, yes, the courts are quicker, so they might be able to get some more free points. But that doesn't mean that they can hold back on serve or not go for their spots, because both players are such good returners generally, and they're able to use pace really well as well. The pace absorption is phenomenal for both players. The Alcaraz slice could be an interesting one in this matchup, because I just wonder how he executes that in this matchup could have quite a big bearing in how some of the points play out, and also potentially the ebbs and flows in this matchup. I think he probably needs to avoid a ball bashing contest with Sinner. Where he comes out on top when it comes to the Jannik matchup is by utilising the variety and the slices, the drop shots, the lobs, and that's been really effective. What Jannik did really well at Wimbledon was actually utilising his drop shot, which has been a more recent update to his repertoire, and he used the drop shot more effectively than Carlos in the Wimbledon final. So I wonder whether we might see something similar from Jannik, some similar tactics employed. He also came to the net a lot more than Carlos, which again is not something you would have expected. So I'm intrigued to see if Jannik tries to employ similar tactics by rushing the net at times, being aggressive, trying to take time away from Carlos on the baseline. I've seen Carlos at times whipping that forehand a lot, and he can hit the forehand in lots of different ways, but I do feel like sometimes when he's whipping that forehand so much, almost, the Rafa Nadal-esque buggy whip, when he's hitting a high percentage of those forehands, it normally means that he's feeling a little bit rushed. So more often than not anyway, that's how I tend to perceive it, because I feel like when he's got more time, he then gets more into the traditional, maybe not traditional, but the more standard but very graceful, kind of like Roger Federer-esque flatter hitting, early connecting forehands, which, look, I think what makes Carlos so great is the ability to hit shots in different ways, and the forehand is one of those, is definitely a big part of that. The question is going to be, though, for Jannik, can he stem the variety of Carlos like he did in Wimbledon, where these courts I think are actually quicker than Wimbledon, but also they're not as lower bouncing. So the slice is, that's what I'm saying, the slice is going to be quite an interesting one, because I do wonder how Carlos will employ that in this matchup. I actually think what he will do, given how bouncy these courts are, is actually hit with a lot of spin, more than we've seen probably from his tournament average. I think he will try and hit with more spin, try and drag Sinner out wide on the forehand cross. And actually, from speaking to someone from Tennis Viz, one of the plays that actually you can get the most purchase from is in the forehand cross-court exchanges. And I do think that Jannik has arguably the best forehand line, especially running forehand line in the game. And forehand cross is still very good, but I would argue that Alcaraz's forehand cross is actually better. So that play, quote-unquote, weakness does make sense, because Carlos, as I said, like, if you're thinking of Jannik hitting a forehand cross, he's going to hit it one way, really. Carlos can hit the buggy whip and find a tighter angle with a lot more spin. He can flatten it out. He can hit with a lot of more loop and depth. I think he will do that. And Jannik likes to hit the ball early. He doesn't like to back up. So he might end up taking some forehands 1 meter behind the baseline, trying to kind of navigate a high ball that's at shoulder height and try and be aggressive and hit through that. And it's going to be difficult for him to do so, in all honesty. So I think tactically it's going to be an interesting one to witness, because I feel that in the past Jannik has managed to dominate the ad court exchange, but then Carlos shored up his backhand defense with not just the slice, but actually just generally feeling more comfortable in the open stance backhand, managing to just feel more solid in those ad court exchanges, and not feeling like he was super uncomfortable on that backhand wing defending from Jannik. So now he's kind of leveled that out, but Jannik's now then added to his game with a drop shot, with a net play, and you just wonder, okay, well, what does Carlos need to do? How does he need to figure out this essentially chess match? And it'll be the same for Jannik as well. I think it's going to be a close one. I think it's going to be 3 sets. I would be surprised if it doesn't go to 3 sets. Who's been playing the better tennis? I would edge it towards Sinner. He hasn't dropped a set yet. In saying that, he hasn't come up against anyone that is I mean, he hasn't come up against anyone who is ranked higher than 23 in the world. So it's not a great yardstick. But in saying that, I think we've seen his level, right, for quite some time now in the last few months. So let's see. I'm very intrigued to see, one, who comes to the net more, two, who does the drop shot more, and three, who will dominate the serve return dynamic, and then also the juice court exchange, because it's interesting that that play has come up has been flagged as a potential play to utilize against Jannik. And I think for Carlos, it's actually not a bad ploy as well, because if he can go high and heavy to Jannik, especially cross court on the forehand, that opens up the drop shot, right? Which is the drop shot, which would be the down the line drop shot on the forehand wing, which he utilizes really well and plays and normally executes quite well. It also opens up the forehand line, which we know he can really crunch through, and it opens up more angles, etc. So we know that the Jannik forehand is monstrous, especially down the line. And the backhand line is also very good, but I think the forehand line is the one to be more worried about than the backhand line. So you probably feel more comfortable going into that backhand, knowing that, okay, yeah, I might come back line, than going into that forehand line, knowing that, okay, more often than not, you're going to get burnt. So if it's not good enough. So those are my thoughts. There's a lot to break down. I could talk about this for an hour, honestly, and break down each tactic, but I don't want to go into that too much depth. Thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. Remember that like button. Do subscribe if you're new, and let me know in the comment section below who you think is going to win and why. See you guys very, very soon.